Have you ever had that feeling that the person everyone sees isn't the real you? Well, today we're going to dive into a sermon that takes that idea to a whole different level. It argues that our true self is actually a spirit, trapped in a kind of physical prison. So, let's break down its powerful message. And that brings us to the huge question right at the heart of this sermon. And it's a question for all of us, really. Who is the real you? I mean, is it the person you show the world every day? Or is there someone else, someone hidden deep down, just waiting to come out? The sermon's answer to that question starts with a pretty big claim. If you want to know who you really are, you have to look past the surface. It all begins with understanding this idea of a hidden person within. So the teaching here is that we're basically made of three parts. You've got your physical body, you've got your reasoning mind, but the real focus is on something deeper, your spirit, which it calls the inner man. This is presented as your true eternal self, the part of you that God actually sees and connects with. And this is where the sermon draws a really sharp line in the sand. On one side, you have your outward appearance. What people see, what they judge. It's temporary, it's physical. But on the other side, you have the hidden heart. And this is what's defined as eternal, precious, and ultimately what really matters to God. Okay, so if this inner man is our true self, why does it feel so buried sometimes? Well, the sermon dives right into that problem. It presents this core idea: our spirit has become trapped in a prison built by our own five senses. To explain how this happened, the sermon lays out a kind of spiritual timeline. It says that before this big event it calls the fall, our spirit was the one in the driver's seat. It had a direct connection to God. But after a major deception, that connection was severed, and the whole power dynamic flipped. The spirit ended up at the bottom, ruled by the five senses. And that's the absolute key point right there. The senses took over. Everything we think of as reality, according to this teaching, is now filtered through what we can see, hear, taste, smell, and touch. So with the senses now running the show, they became the new kings of our experience. The sermon argues that they started to teach our brain, shaping every single piece of knowledge we have based only on physical stuff. And that's how the prison was built, It effectively walled the spirit off from its real source of truth. The result of all this is a state of spiritual captivity. And the sermon illustrates this with this incredibly powerful quote from the Psalms. It's framed as the actual cry of the spirit itself, trapped and begging to be set free. All right, so the spirit is in prison. That sounds pretty bleak, right? But this is where the whole narrative pivots. We shift from the problem to the solution, a mission of liberation. And in direct response to that cry from the prison, the sermon offers this quote as the ultimate answer. It frames Jesus' purpose not as political liberation, but as a spiritual rescue mission, freeing those held captive by their own senses. So let's be really clear what this mission is about. It's about breaking the authority that our sensory knowledge has over us. It's all about freeing the human spirit from that prison and putting it back where it belongs, as the leader, not the follower of our body and mind. So how does this freedom actually happen? In the sermon's terms, it's through the experience of being born again. And this isn't just a saying. It's described as a literal spiritual event. The old, imprisoned spirit gets replaced with a brand new spirit and heart, and that's what reestablishes that lost connection to God. But getting liberated is really just the beginning. Once that spirit is reconnected and free, what's next? Well, the sermon argues that this new freedom comes with a new kind of power, spiritual authority over the physical world. And we are talking about some serious authority here. The sermon claims that a person whose spirit is born again and back in charge can operate with the same kind of power Jesus did. We're talking authority over nature, over sickness, and even over death itself. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Authority over nature? That can sound pretty abstract. So, to make this idea really hit home, the sermon grounds it in a dramatic, real-world story, a modern miracle shared as a personal testimony. So here's how the story goes. It starts with a huge problem. A man named Joel's father gets really, really sick. We're talking a severe cough, coughing up blood. It's bad. Then comes the diagnosis. An X-ray at the hospital shows his right lung is completely infected, filled with fluid. Medically, the situation looks grim. But that's when the spiritual intervention happens. While they're waiting for a CT scan, the family calls their pastor, who prays for the father right there over the speakerphone. And the result? The sermon claims that the very next day, the CT scan came back completely clear. The doctors found zero fluid, zero infection. This man, who had been weak and frail, was up and walking around again. This story is presented as the ultimate proof that this spiritual authority is a real, tangible force today. And all of that brings us right back to the central conflict of this sermon. It leaves us with a final, really provocative question to think about. In your own life, what's really in charge? Is it the world you can see, hear, and touch? Or is it something else entirely?